The distress signal came from the edge of known space, where the galaxy's spiral arm thinned into darkness. It wasn't the usual electromagnetic pulse or quantum burst that most civilized species used for communication. This signal was raw, desperate, and transmitted across every frequency simultaneously, a cosmic scream that made monitoring stations throughout the galaxy shudder. Captain Sarah stood on the bridge of the UES Defiance, watching the signal analysis scroll across her displays. The ship hummed around her, a kilometer of human engineering and stubborn determination that had earned respect and fear in equal measure throughout the galaxy. Her crew of 300 souls represented the best of humanity's military might, but more importantly, they represented something the galaxy had never seen before, who chose to help rather than conquer. "Ma'am, we're getting the same readings from the Bloodhound and the Relentless," reported Lieutenant Torres from the communications station. "The entire Third Fleet is picking this up clear as day." Nodded, her weathered face grim. She'd spent 20 years in space, fighting pirates, exploring dead worlds, and mediating disputes between species that couldn't agree on what color the void was. But this signal was different. It carried something that made her human instincts scream danger while simultaneously pulling at her conscience. "What do the other species make of it?" she asked. Torres checked his secondary displays. "The Confederation acknowledges reception but says it's outside their patrol zone. The Empire claims it's likely a trap, the Crystalline Collective." He paused. "They say the signal originates from a region they've marked as Forbidden Approach." Raised an eyebrow. The Crystalline Collective was ancient, older than most species' recorded history. If they marked something as forbidden, there was usually a very good reason, usually involving things that could unmake matter at the molecular level or worse. "And the Galactic Council?" she asked, though she already suspected the answer. 47 hours of debate so far," Torres replied with a slight smile. "They've formed 3 committees to study the issue and appointed a subcommittee to determine if they need more committees." The captain allowed herself a small chuckle. Humanity had been part of the Galactic Council for only 50 years, but they'd quickly learned that most problems got talked to death long before any action was taken. It was one of the reasons human ships often operated independently, much to the other species' mixed relief and concern. "Commander Wells," called to her first officer, a tall woman whose cybernetic arm was a souvenir from the border wars. "How long to reach the signal's origin?" Wells consulted her tactical display. 18 hours at maximum burn, assuming we don't run into any spatial anomalies or hostile forces. "And the rest of the fleet?" "The Bloodhound can match our pace. The Relentless will need 20 hours. She's still running repairs from the asteroid mining dispute." Wells paused. "Captain, I should mention that this course takes us into uncharted territory. No human ship has been this far into the outer arm." Studied the star chart hologram floating above the navigation station. Beyond the signal's origin point, the stars grew sparse and strange. Ancient sensor data suggested the presence of rogue planets, dead systems, and gravitational anomalies that current physics models. It was the kind of place where ships went missing and were never found. "Ma'am," interrupted Ensign from the science station, his voice tight with excitement and concern. "I'm reading something else from the signal. There are biological markers embedded in the transmission." "Explain." His fingers danced over his controls, pulling up a complex waveform analysis. "The signal isn't just a distress call. It's carrying genetic information, atmospheric data, population estimates. It's like someone took a complete biological survey of their world and transmitted it along with their cry for help." The bridge fell silent except for the constant hum of the ship's systems. Felt a chill run down her spine as the implications hit her. Whatever was sending this signal wasn't just calling for help. They were providing a complete database of their species, as if they expected to be extinct before any help could arrive. "How many?" she asked quietly. Swallowed hard. "Best estimates based on the genetic diversity markers, approximately 2 billion individuals. 2 billion lives. Had seen wars that claimed millions, natural disasters that wiped out entire colonies, but 2 billion was a number that staggered the imagination. It was more than the current population of most human colonies combined. "Commander, signal the fleet," she ordered. "We're moving to investigate." "Captain," Wells said carefully, "regulations require council approval for operations beyond mapped space." Turned to face her first officer, and Wells saw the expression that had made Sarah legendary among both humans and aliens. The look of someone who had stared into the abyss and decided to stare back harder. Commander, 2 billion lives are potentially at stake. While the Council debates whether to form a committee to study the formation of committees, people are dying. She paused. Besides, we're not technically violating regulations. We're responding to a distress signal which falls under maritime law, or in this case, void law. Wells smiled. Aye, Captain, I'll signal the fleet. As the Defiance began its burn toward the outer rim, Captain couldn't shake the feeling that this was more than a simple rescue mission. Something about the signal bothered her beyond its desperate urgency. The biological data was too complete, too organized for a species in its death throes. It was almost as if they'd been preparing for this moment, gathering everything they needed to tell their story before the end came. 18 hours later, the human fleet dropped out of hyperspace in a system that shouldn't have existed according to most stellar formation models. 3 stars orbited each other in a complex dance that created zones of perpetual twilight and regions where the combined light could blind unprotected sensors. At the center of this cosmic ballet hung a world that easy categorization. My God, whispered Dr. Price, the fleet's chief, as the sensor data flooded her screens. It's beautiful. The planet below was a tapestry of impossible colors. Vast forests of crystal trees that seemed to grow in mathematical spirals covered continents that drifted on seas of liquid mercury. Cities, if they could be called that, rose from the surface like organic growths, their architecture flowing and alive. And everywhere there was evidence of a civilization that had learned to work with their world rather than against it. But there were also signs of devastation. Entire continents showed scorch marks visible from orbit. The liquid mercury seas were boiling in some regions, sending toxic vapor clouds into the atmosphere. And in the spaces between the cities, huge craters marked where something had systematically begun destroying this beautiful world. Captain, reported Commander Wells, I'm reading massive energy signatures from the far side of the planet. Whatever's causing the destruction, it's still active. Before could respond, a new signal reached the fleet. Not the broad distress call they'd been following, but a tight beam transmission directed specifically at their ships. Unknown vessels, came a voice unlike anything in the galactic database, musical yet urgent. We are the of the Third Harmony. We have watched your approach with hope and fear. You travel in ships of war, yet you came to our cry for aid. Are you the of whom the void whispers? Are you the ones who choose to fight when others choose to flee? Captain looked around her bridge at faces that reflected her own mixture of surprise and determination. Humanity's reputation had spread faster than their actual physical presence, it seemed. Stories of human stubbornness, human courage, and human refusal to accept the impossible had become legend among the galaxy's older species. This is Captain Sarah of the United Earth ship Defiance, she responded. We received your distress signal and have come to render aid. What is your situation? The response came immediately, as if the beings below had been waiting desperately for any acknowledgement. Captain, we are dying. Our world is dying. 3 cycles ago, they came from the deep void, the devourers, the endless hunger. They consume not just matter, but the very concept of life itself. We have held them back with our harmonies, with the combined will of our people, but we grow weak. Our songs grow faint. On the main screen, the tactical display updated to show the source of the massive energy signatures. What saw there made her blood run cold. Shapes that seemed to exist partially outside normal space were emerging from tiers in reality itself, each one the size of a city block. They moved with purpose toward the populated areas of the planet, and wherever they passed, the very fabric of space seemed to dim and decay. They are not creatures as we understand them, continued the voice. They are wholes in creation itself, and they hunger for the light of consciousness. We have watched 17 civilizations fall to their advance across the outer rim. Soon, we will join that silence. Studied the tactical display, her mind racing through possibilities. The human fleet was powerful, but these entities' conventional understanding. Energy weapons might be useless against something that wasn't fully in their dimension. Kinetic weapons would be equally pointless against beings that could step outside normal space. Dr. Price, she called, what's your assessment? They had been analyzing the sensor data with the focused intensity that made her one of the fleet's most valuable officers. Captain, these devourers, they're not operating on conventional physics, but they seem to be holding them back somehow. The energy readings suggest some form of directed consciousness manipulation, like they're using thought itself as a weapon. Psychic powers? Wells asked skeptically. More than that, Price replied. They're using collective consciousness as a tool. The entire population is somehow linked, creating a combined mental force that can interact with reality at a quantum level. But the effort is killing them, literally burning out their life force. Felt the pieces clicking together in her mind. They weren't just fighting for their lives, they were fighting for the concept of life itself. And if these devourers had already destroyed 17 civilizations, they wouldn't stop here. They would continue their advance, consuming everything in their path until they reached the populated regions of the galaxy. How long can the hold out? She asked. Price checked her readings. Based on the degradation rate of their biosignatures, maybe 6 hours. After that, their collective consciousness will collapse and the devourers will finish them. 6 hours to save 2 billion lives and potentially stop a threat that could consume the galaxy. Had faced impossible odds before, but this was beyond anything in human experience. Yet as she looked around her bridge at the faces of her crew, she saw the same determination that had driven humanity to the stars in the first place. All stations battle stations, she ordered. Signal the Bloodhound and Relentless, we're going in. Captain, Wells said quietly, our weapons may be useless against these entities. Smiled grimly. Commander, we're humans. When our weapons don't work, we get creative. And if creativity doesn't work, we get stubborn. Either way, those people down there aren't dying on my watch. As the human ships moved toward the planet, their crews preparing for a battle unlike any in their history, Captain opened a channel to the... This is Captain, she transmitted. Hold on, the cavalry is coming. Below on the dying world, 2 billion voices lifted in harmony, their song growing stronger for the first time in days. Hope, they sang, had arrived wearing the flag of Earth, and death itself would learn to fear the sound of human determination. The first human ship to enter the planet's atmosphere was a reconnaissance drone launched from the Bloodhound. Within minutes of crossing into the upper atmosphere, it simply ceased to exist, not destroyed, not damaged, but erased from reality as if it had never been built. The telemetry cut off mid-transmission, leaving only static where sophisticated instruments had been recording data moments before. Well, that's not encouraging, muttered Chief Engineer from his station aboard the Defiance. He pulled up the drone's last readings on his display. Whatever those things are doing, they're not just attacking matter, they're attacking the information that describes matter. Captain studied the readings with growing unease. In her 20 years of military service, she'd seen antimatter weapons, reality-bending alien technologies, and stellar-scale engineering projects. But this was something else entirely, an enemy that could reach into the fundamental code of the universe and simply delete things. Dr. Price, can they protect our ships the way they're protecting their planet? She asked. They shook her head. Their harmony field seems to be specifically attuned to their world's quantum signature. Extending it to cover our ships would require integrating our consciousness into their collective, and we don't even know if human brains are compatible with their neural network. What about partial integration? Suggested Commander Wells. Could we establish some kind of limited connection? Price looked uncertain. The risks would be enormous. If our minds aren't compatible with their collective consciousness, the feedback could kill us. Or worse, it could break their harmony and leave them defenseless. Before could respond, the main communication panel lit up with an incoming transmission. The voice that emerged was the same musical tone they'd heard before, but now it carried an undertone of desperate urgency. Human fleet, we have been monitoring your probe's destruction. The Devourers have noticed your presence and are adapting their assault patterns. They grow stronger as they consume our reality. On the tactical display, the situation was becoming clearer. The tier-like entities that emerged from dimensional rifts were no longer simply advancing on population centers. They were spreading out, forming a perimeter around the entire planet. More disturbing still, new rifts were opening in space around the human fleet itself. They're trying to surround us, observed Wells. Cut off our retreat. Nodded grimly. Signal the fleet. All ships maintain formation but be ready to break and run if I give the word. Captain, came a new voice over the communication channel, younger than the first, but carrying the same musical quality. I am Resonance of Standing Waters, what you might call a military commander among my people. We have a proposal, but it carries great risk for both our species. The main shimmered and displayed a three-dimensional map of the planet and surrounding space. The cities were marked in blue, pulsing with the rhythm of their collective consciousness. The devourer entities appeared as red voids that seemed to hurt the eyes to look at directly, and around the planet's edge, more red markers indicated the positions of human ships. Our harmony can protect you, continued Resonance of Standing Waters, but only if we link your consciousness to ours temporarily. The process is dangerous. Your minds work differently than ours, and the connection could damage both our species' mental patterns. Dr. Price leaned forward at her station. What exactly would this linking involve? 3 of your people would need to join our harmony directly to become temporary nodes in our consciousness network. Through them, we could extend our protection to your entire fleet. But those 3 would experience our thoughts, our memories, our pain, and we would experience theirs. The bridge fell silent except for the constant hum of the ship systems. Could feel the weight of the decision settling on her shoulders. 3 members of her crew, volunteers, would have to risk their sanity and possibly their lives to give the fleet a chance at fighting these creatures. What happens to our people after the battle? Wells asked the question that everyone was thinking. Unknown, came the honest reply. No species has ever attempted such a link with us before. They might return to normal consciousness, or they might remain partially connected to our harmony forever. There is also the possibility that the experience could, the voice paused, could break their minds entirely. Looked around her bridge at the faces of her crew. She saw fear there, but also determination. These were people who had volunteered to serve in the depths of space, facing unknown dangers for the protection of others. But this was asking them to risk something more fundamental than their lives, their very identities. I'll do it. The voice came from Lieutenant Torres at the communications station. The young officer stood up, his face pale but resolute. Captain, I volunteer for the link. Torres began. Ma'am, I've been working with alien communication systems for 5 years. My mind is already adapted to processing non-human thought patterns. I'm the logical choice. Before could respond, Dr. Price stood as well. I volunteer too. My xenobiology training includes extensive neural mapping studies. I understand consciousness interaction better than most. Felt pride and fear warring in her chest. These were good people, willing to sacrifice themselves for strangers they'd never met. But she couldn't ask them to take risks she wouldn't take herself. I'm the 3rd volunteer, she announced. Captain, no, Wells protested. The fleet needs you in command. The fleet needs to survive, Commander, and that means taking whatever risks are necessary. Turned to the communication panel. Resonance of Standing Waters, we accept your proposal. How do we proceed? You must come to the surface, to our primary harmony chamber in the capital city of Luminous Echoes. But the journey will be dangerous. The Devourers are actively hunting your ships now. As if summoned by these words, alarms began sounding throughout the bridge. On the tactical display, red markers were converging on the human fleet's position. The Devourer entities moved through space like living shadows, leaving trails of absolute nothingness in their wake. All ships evasive maneuvers, ordered, but maintain formation toward the planet. The next 30 minutes were unlike anything in human military history. The Defiance and her sister ships dodged and weaved through 3-dimensional space, while creatures that existed partially outside reality tried to erase them from existence. Energy shields were useless. The Devourers didn't attack the barriers. They simply ignored them and struck at the matter beyond. Armor plating offered no protection against entities that could delete the concept of the armor itself. But human pilots had one advantage that the Devourers seemed not to expect: unpredictability. Where most species followed logical, efficient patterns of movement, humans flew with intuition and instinct. The Defiance rolled and dove through maneuvers, that tactical doctrine following patterns that even its own navigation computer couldn't predict. It's working, reported the helm officer, sweat beading on his forehead. They can't lock onto us if they can't predict our movements. One of the Devourers managed to graze the Relentless, and everyone watched in horror as a section of the ship's hull simply vanished. Not destroyed, not vaporized, erased, as if that portion of the ship had never existed. But the crew adapted with typical human stubbornness, sealing the impossible breach with emergency bulkheads and continuing their descent toward the planet. As the fleet approached the capital city, The first glimpses of the alien architecture took everyone's breath away. The buildings didn't stand on the ground so much as grow from it, their crystalline structures resonating with visible light that pulsed in rhythm with heartbeats they couldn't hear. And everywhere, the sound of the harmony, not heard through their equipment, but felt directly in their minds as a vast, beautiful song of defiance against the dark. "Captain," came resonance of Standing Water's voice, "land in the central plaza. We will guide you to the harmony chamber." The landing was controlled chaos. Human Marines formed defensive perimeters while the three volunteers prepared themselves for the mental link. Dr. Price ran final medical scans, ensuring their brain patterns were as stable as possible before the attempt. Torres checked and double-checked his communication equipment, knowing he might need to coordinate the fleet's movements while his mind was partially merged with an alien consciousness. Captain stood at the edge of the landing platform, looking up at the structures that rose around them like frozen music. The harmonious sound in her mind was growing stronger, and she could feel the presence of 2 billion connected consciousness pressing at the edges of her thoughts. "Captain," Dr. Price said quietly, "there's something else. The medical scans I've been running on they're not just fighting these creatures with mental powers. They're literally burning their life force to maintain the harmony. Every moment they resist their aging years, the effort is killing them." Absorbed this information with a heavy heart. They weren't just facing extinction from external enemies. They were sacrificing themselves to hold the line, buying time for a rescue that might never come. "Then we'd better make this count," she replied. The harmony chamber was unlike anything human science had ever encountered. The walls appeared to be made of living crystal that sang with their own inner light. In the center of the space, a pool of liquid that wasn't quite water reflected lights that came from no visible source. And around the pool, dozens of stood in meditation, their forms beautiful and alien and slowly fatting as their life force ebbed away. Resonance of Standing Waters approached them and got her first clear look at one of the beings they'd come to save. It was roughly humanoid but seemed to be made of living music given form. Their bodies shifted between states, sometimes solid crystal, sometimes pure energy, sometimes something that human eyes couldn't quite process. But their presence in the harmony was unmistakable, a warm, welcoming consciousness that radiated both hope and desperate fear. "The process is simple," they explained, gesturing toward the central pool. "You enter the harmony waters and we guide your consciousness into resonance with ours. But once the link is established, you will experience everything we experience, our thoughts, our memories, our pain, and we will know you in return." The three humans exchanged glances. They'd come this far, risked everything to help a species they'd never met. There was no turning back now. Torres was the first to step into the pool. The liquid that wasn't quite water felt warm and seemed to pulse with its own heartbeat. As it rose around his legs, his mind began to fill with voices. Millions of voices, all singing in harmony, all connected by bonds deeper than human understanding. Dr. Price followed and saw her expression change as the alien consciousness touched her mind. Wonder, fear, and something approaching ecstasy crossed her features as she experienced thoughts and sensations no human had ever known. Captain was the last to enter the pool. As the strange liquid closed over her, her human consciousness suddenly exploded outward to encompass a network of 2 billion minds. She felt their history, cycles of peace and growth, the slow development of their collective consciousness, the joy of minds touching minds in perfect understanding. And she felt their terror as the devourers had emerged from the void, consuming reality itself, destroying not just life but the very concept of existence. But as the human minds joined the harmony, something unexpected happened. The song changed, grew stronger, took on new harmonics that had never existed before. Human determination, human stubbornness, human refusal to accept defeat merged with unity and created something neither species had imagined possible. Through their shared consciousness felt this amazement. "Your minds," whispered resonance of Standing Waters through the mental link. "They do not bend, they do not break, they simply refuse to acknowledge that breaking is possible." And in that moment, as 3 human minds joined with 2 billion alien ones, the harmony that protected their world began to change from a desperate defense into something approaching a weapon. The transformation began immediately. Through the merged consciousness network, Captain felt the harmony shift from a protective barrier to something far more aggressive. They had spent generations learning to sing reality into defensive shapes, but humans brought something they had never considered, the willingness to sing reality into weapons. "This is impossible," whispered resonance of standing waters through the mental link, but their voice carried wonder rather than disbelief. "You're teaching our song to fight back." Felt her human consciousness spreading through the network, touching minds that sparkled like living jewels in the vast web of connection. Each she encountered was unique: artists who painted with light itself, engineers who grew buildings like flowers, philosophers who thought in musical mathematics. But all of them had accepted that their role was to preserve and protect, never to attack. Sometimes, projected through the link, her thoughts carrying the weight of human military doctrine, the best defense is a good offense. Through Dr. Price's connection, the network gained access to human scientific understanding, knowledge of physics and chemistry that they had approached from completely different angles. The alien minds were amazed to discover that humans thought of reality as something that could be manipulated through technology rather than consciousness. In return, human understanding expanded to encompass this reality-shaping abilities. Lieutenant Torres brought something equally valuable: tactical communications experience. Within minutes of joining the network, he had established communication links between the Harmony and the human fleet above. Now the three ships could coordinate their movements with the planet-bound defense, creating a unified battle plan that neither species could have achieved alone. "Fleet Command," Torres transmitted both vocally and through the Harmony link, "we're about to try something that's never been done before. Stand by for the impossible." Above the planet, the Devourer entities had completed their encirclement. The tear-like beings hung in space like wounds in reality itself, and through their openings, more creatures were emerging, things that hurt to look at directly, entities that existed in too many dimensions for human perception to process safely. Commander Wells, now in charge of the fleet on the surface, watched the tactical displays with growing unease. "They're not just surrounding us," she reported to the Harmony link. "They're building something, some kind of formation." Through the shared consciousness, the combined human intelligence analyzed the Devourer's movements. What they discovered chilled them to their cores. The creatures weren't just randomly consuming reality. They were preparing to tear a permanent rift in space-time itself, a gateway that would allow unlimited numbers of their kind to pour into normal space. "If they complete that formation," projected one of the military minds, "they will not simply consume our world. They will open a path for the endless hunger to devour this entire spiral arm of the galaxy." Felt the weight of this revelation through the network. Billions of lives across hundreds of worlds, all hanging in the balance. It was exactly the kind of impossible situation that humans specialized in making possible. "How long until they complete their formation?" she asked through the link. 17 minutes, came the reply from multiple sources simultaneously. 17 minutes to save not just but potentially the entire galaxy. Felt her human determination surge through the network, touching every connected mind and kindling something that they had never experienced: the absolute refusal to accept defeat. "Dr. Price," projected, "can we use the Harmony to enhance our ship's weapons?" "More than that," came the excited reply as Price's scientific mind merged with understanding of reality manipulation. "We can use the Harmony to make our ships temporarily exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. The Devourers can't erase what they can't fully perceive." "Torres, signal the fleet. All ships to prepare for dimensional phase transition on my mark." What happened next violated several fundamental laws of physics and at least 3 interstellar treaties regarding reality manipulation. The Harmony, now enhanced by human determination and scientific understanding, reached out across space and embraced the 3 human warships. Reality bent around them like heated metal, and suddenly the ships existed in normal space and 11 other dimensions simultaneously. To the Devourers, the human fleet simply vanished from. Their reality-erasing attacks struck empty space where the ships had been, finding nothing to consume. But the ship's weapons, now existing across multiple dimensions, could strike at the creatures from angles that conventional geometry. "All ships commence firing," ordered Commander Wells, her voice carrying both across radio channels and through the Harmony link. The first barrage was unlike anything in human military history. Energy beams that bent through folded space, kinetic projectiles that struck from impossible directions, and missile salvos that approached their targets by traveling through dimensions where distance had different meanings. But more importantly, The weapons carried something the Devourers had never encountered, the focused will of a hybrid consciousness that refused to be unmade. The effect was immediate and devastating. Devourer entities that had seemed invulnerable to conventional attacks suddenly found themselves under assault from weapons that existed in too many dimensions for them to properly defend against. One by one, the reality-consuming creatures began to collapse, their forms dissolving back into the dimensional rifts from which they had emerged. But the Devourers adapted quickly. As their formation began to fail, they changed tactics, abandoning their attempt to create a permanent gateway in favor of a direct assault on the planet's surface. If they couldn't open a path for their kind, they would at least consume the consciousness that had dared to fight back. "Massive energy readings from the planetary surface," reported Wells. "They're trying to break through the harmony barrier by brute force." Through the network, felt this terror as the Devourers concentrated their attack. The harmony that had protected them for so long was beginning to crack under the assault. Reality itself seemed to scream as the creatures pressed their attack. "We need to strike directly at their source," projected through the link. "Where are they coming from originally?" The combined consciousness searched through the sensor data, human analytical thinking merging with intuitive understanding. Deep in the readings, they found it. A massive dimensional rift hidden behind one of the system's 3 stars, carefully concealed but growing larger with each passing moment. "It's a beachhead," realized Dr. Price. "They've been building a staging area in our reality, using the star's radiation to mask their presence." Felt the weight of the decision settling over her consciousness. To attack the source, they would need to take the fight directly to the creature's stronghold, abandoning the protective harmony that kept them safe. It was a one-way trip into the mouth of the beast. "Fleet Command," she transmitted, her thoughts carrying the finality of the decision. "Prepare for direct assault on the primary rift. We're going to close that gateway permanently." "Captain," Wells replied, "we'll be completely exposed once we leave the Harmony's protection." "Then we'll have to move fast," projected back. "Dr. Price, can the Harmony field be compressed into a single devastating attack?" "Theoretically, yes," came the reply, "but it would require the complete cooperation of every consciousness in the network. Every human, all focused on a single moment of unified will." Through the link, felt the network's response, 2 billion alien minds and 3 human ones all turning toward the same purpose. The harmony that had been a song of protection began to transform into something else entirely, a war cry that resonated across dimensions. The human fleet broke from orbit in perfect formation, their ships still existing across multiple realities, but now moving with purpose toward the hidden rift. Behind them, the planet's surface blazed with light as they poured everything they had into the final effort. As they approached the concealed gateway, could see the true scope of what they faced. The rift stretched for thousands of kilometers, a wound in space-time itself that pulsed with malevolent energy. And through it, she could see them, countless devourer entities waiting to pour into normal space, an army of nothingness that could consume galaxies. "All ships target the rift's dimensional anchor points," Wells ordered. "We're going to collapse this thing from the outside in." The final battle lasted less than 3 minutes, but felt like an eternity to everyone connected to the Harmony network. Human weapons, enhanced by reality-shaping abilities, struck at the fundamental structure of the rift, while the creatures within fought back with increasing desperation. Space itself seemed to convulse as dimension fought dimension. At the climactic moment, made a decision that would be remembered across the galaxy for generations. Instead of simply destroying the rift, she projected her consciousness directly into it, carrying with her the combined will of the entire network. What the Devourers encountered there was something they had never faced before, a consciousness that simply refused to be consumed. Human determination, by 2 billion voices, struck at the creature's fundamental nature. For beings that existed by unmaking reality, the encounter with minds that would not be unmade was catastrophic. The rift collapsed in a cascade of imploding dimensions, taking with it the staging area and thousands of devourer entities. The explosion was visible from systems hundreds of light years away as a brief, brilliant flash that seemed to make the stars themselves sing. When the light faded, the immediate threat was over. The surviving devourer entities fled back into deep space, apparently unwilling to face the hybrid consciousness that had beaten them so decisively. The planet was safe, its people saved from extinction by the intervention of a species they had never met. But the consequences of the battle reached far beyond a single world. Word spread quickly through the galaxy about the who had answered a desperate cry for help, risking everything to save strangers. The hybrid consciousness technique, born from the merger of human determination and harmony, became the foundation for a new kind of defense against threats that conventional weapons couldn't touch. Captain Dr. Price and Lieutenant Torres returned to normal consciousness, forever changed by their experience. They carried within their minds echoes of the harmony, and occasionally, in moments of stress or danger, they could still hear the songs of 2 billion grateful voices. The alliance between humanity and the grew into something unprecedented in galactic history, a true meeting of minds that combined the best qualities of both species. Human ship crews began learning the basics of harmony singing, while consciousness shapers studied human tactical doctrine and scientific method. And in the deep void beyond the galaxy's edge, other ancient threats took notice of what had happened. The endless hunger had been stopped, perhaps for the first time in cosmic memory, by creatures that simply refused to accept the impossible. It was a lesson that would reshape the balance of power across the universe. Standing on the bridge of the Defiance 6 months later, Captain received a transmission from the Galactic Council. After extensive committee meetings and subcommittee reviews, they had decided to formally commend the human fleet for their actions in the rescue. Smiled as she deleted the transmission without reading it. Outside her viewports, 3 human ships and a dozen Harmony vessels moved in perfect formation, their crews sharing consciousness across species barriers that had seemed insurmountable just months before. They had work to do. Other distress signals had been detected, other calls for help from the galaxy's darkest corners. Somewhere in the void, the Devourers and their kin learned a new emotion, fear. Because now they knew that the galaxy contained something that could not be consumed, could not be unmade, could not be defeated by any conventional means. Humanity had arrived in the galactic community with the sound of answering prayers, and the echo of that signal would resonate across the void for generations to come.